The actions of President Donald Trump have been regularly blocked or stalled by various court actions. Now, Trump is taking actions as we speak to begin preventing this from happening. And also alongside this order, Trump has also been revoking the security clearances of many of his political rivals and critics. And he has also pulled the security clearances now of former Vice President Kamala Harris and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. And meanwhile, among the many debates now happening in the country is also whether green card holders or migrants can have their visas or other documents revoked if they begin acting against the United States. Well, we could potentially see this happen. I'll be talking about these topics and more today, so let's get started. Now look, first of all, the actions of President Donald Trump have been regularly getting stalled or blocked by courts. Now, you might have seen many of these are in turn brought about by lawsuits from various, agencies, a handful of them usually. And now Donald Trump is taking actions to prevent the attorneys and law firms from blocking the actions of the president. The White House said this, presidential action, quote, memorandum for the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security, subject, preventing abuses of the legal system and the federal court lawyers and law firms that engage in actions that violate the laws of the United States or rules governing attorney conduct must be efficiently and effectively held accountable. Now, it notes this. Accountability is especially important when misconduct by lawyers and law firms, according to Trump, threatens our national security, homeland security, public safety, or election integrity. And of course, a lot of his actions are around deportations, and that has become national security and homeland security because he has designated gangs as terror organizations. And he's alleging that if we're at war with terrorists, or if we're getting rid of gangs, or if it involves election integrity, well, this deals with the national security, which is the jurisdiction of the executive branch, meaning the president, and he's arguing the judicial branch should not be able to overreach into some of these areas. Now, it notes this as well. Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 11 prohibits attorneys from engaging in certain unethical conduct in federal courts. Attorneys must not present legal filings for improper purposes, including to harass, cause unnecessary delay, or needlessly increase the cost of litigation. It notes attorneys must ensure that legal arguments are warranted by existing law or by a non-frivolous argument for extending, modifying, or reversing existing law or for establishing new law. And it says attorneys must ensure that their statements about facts are reasonably based on evidentiary support or a belief that such evidence actually exists. When these commands are violated, opposing parties are authorized to file a motion for sanctions. It notes the text of the rule specifically addresses and provides for sanctions for attorneys and their firms, as well as for recalcitrant parties to give the solemn obligation that attorneys have to respect the rule of law and uphold other nations' legal systems with integrity. And furthermore, Rule 3.1 of the Model Rules of Professional Conduct provides that, quote, a lawyer shall not bring or defend a proceeding or assert or controvert an issue therein unless there is a basis in law and fact for doing so that is not frivolous, which includes a good faith argument for an extension, modification, or reversal of existing law. Now, this is all important, and I'll explain in just a moment, but Trump says this, unfortunately, far too many attorneys and law firms have long ignored these requirements when litigating against the federal government or in pursuing baseless partisan attacks. To address these concerns, he says, I hereby direct the Attorney General to seek sanctions against attorneys and law firms who engage in frivolous, unreasonable, and vexatious litigation against the United States or in matters before executive departments and the agencies of the United States. Now look, let's dig into this. The point here that attorneys are not legally allowed to file lawsuits if the intent is to harass, cause unnecessary delay, or needlessly increase the litigation, the cost of litigation. That's interesting because look, when it comes to politics, this is kind of common. Sometimes there's a goal, even publicly stated in some cases, of using lawsuits to delay things. Part of the agenda, some would say, when it comes to the lawsuits against Trump right now is to delay his actions until the midterms. delay it as much as they can, hope they can get somebody in place. Maybe the Democrats could retake the House of Representatives in order to stall Trump, because otherwise he has effectively control of the whole government right now. Legal intervention is the only thing they can do to prevent Trump from doing what he wants to do. And if, again, Democrats are able to get control of the House or the Senate, it means that they can block most of his actions. They don't need both, they just need one or the other. The other issue is when the president is using executive action, right? Executive orders and so on, meaning he bypasses that whole process. The only way they can block that is through the courts. And one of the ideas is, of course, you can delay things, you can stop it, you can put a hold on things, let it go through the court system. That might take, I don't know, a year, 2 years, 3 years. And before you know it, it's election season yet again, and most of the president's actions have been stalled or blocked. It's generally understood that this is kind of the way politics works to an extent, and it's been kind of common that law firms do these things. And it also ties into the whole spectrum of, legal warfare, lawfare, the use of law as a weapon, the use of law as a political tool, the use of law for methods outside the normal spectrum of just litigating cases, right? In other words, you're using the legal system as a political tool or a warfare tool. And there's also the restrictions on making sure that legal arguments are, quote, warranted by existing law or by a non-frivolous argument for extending, modifying, or reversing existing law or for establishing new law. In other words, if a law has never been used in a certain way, you can't just kind of do it that way. People need to know if they're breaking a law, if you're going to file a lawsuit against them. People need to understand kind of the basics of what the law is. You can't just make up interpretations of existing laws in order to create new standards of what's legal or illegal, if you go by the technicality of this. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of cases over the last several years that involve, novel interpretations of laws. Trump is addressing that, seemingly head-on right here. Things that were, quote, unprecedented, right? We've never seen the law used in such a way. And when it gets in that territory, it raises the question of how a person could ever imagine they were violating the law. If the law was never previously interpreted in a certain way, and you do that thing and there's no precedence to it, and you believe you're totally fine, can you still be in violation of it? That's a big question, right? Novel interpretations and lawsuits based on that. And this is also one of the issues that a lot of Trump supporters and Trump himself has faced over the years when you're dealing with these novel interpretations. And kind of this goes into the case for the order overall, which Trump is making right now. It notes, quote, unfortunately, far too many attorneys and law firms have long ignored these requirements when litigating against the federal government or in pursuing baseless partisan attacks. Now, when it comes to this, the reality is lawfare has become pretty common in the country. This is kind of the way things have been going. And this isn't necessarily a partisan issue either. You have conservative ones that do this too. There are groups on the right and on the left that basically make legal cases with the intent of engaging in politics. And there are even allegations from the Trump administration that some political law firms, the allegation Trump and others around them are making, some of them will judge shop. They'll look for judges who they think will interpret the law like they do, or play the political game like they do. They'll intentionally file their cases in a handful of select courts because those courts tend to have a precedence of ruling in their favor. They will judge shop, they'll put it in that court, they'll make the lawsuit, it'll block the president of the United States, the judge will make a ruling putting everything on hold, and even though other judges may not interpret the law that way, these ones do, they go to them. And the allegation on the Trump side is that's kind of the strategy. Again, believe that or not, depending on which side you're on, because the other side is, well, Trump is kind of ruling by decree right now. And many would argue that a president should not be able to effectively use orders in that way, although others have. Obama did it. Others have done it as well. Reagan, I think, did it to an extent. But what's interesting as well is it seems there's an established law that allows for sanctions against law firms. This is what Trump is kind of invoking right now. Trump is invoking a law that allows the government to sanction law firms if they engage in these types of practices. even though you could argue these types of practices have been common for kind of a long time now. And Trump is now actively and openly invoking these powers to go after them, in addition to a lot of other actions. This is what Trump is saying he's going to do. He said, quote, "I further direct the Attorney General and the Secretary of Homeland Security to prioritize enforcement of their respective regulations governing attorney conduct and discipline." He says, "I further direct the Attorney General to take all appropriate action to refer for disciplinary action any attorney whose conduct in federal court or before any component of the federal government appears to violate professional conduct rules, including governing meritorious claims and contentions, and particularly in cases that implicate national security, homeland security, public safety, or election integrity." And he says, I further direct that when an attorney general determines that conduct by an attorney or law firm in litigation against the federal government warrants seeking sanctions or other disciplinary action, the attorney general shall, in consultation with any relevant senior executive official, recommend to the president, through the assistant to the president for domestic policy, additional steps that may be taken, including reassessment of security clearances held by the attorney or termination of any federal contract for which the relevant attorney or law firm has been hired to perform services. And he's also saying, "I further direct the Attorney General in consultation with any relevant senior executive official to review conduct by attorneys or their law firms in litigation against the federal government for the last 8 years." Meaning this would cover not only the Biden years, but also Trump's first term in office, when he was also facing a lot of legal stalls like this. Meaning Trump is not only going after firms or organizations that were using the law to block him this time, whether you believe that's legal or not. He's even going back to his first term in office to look at whether these actions were happening. And he says if the Attorney General identifies misconduct that may warrant additional action, such as filing frivolous litigation or engaging in fraudulent practices, the Attorney General is directed to recommend to the President, through the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy, additional steps that may be taken, including reassessment of security clearances held by the attorney, termination of any contract for which the relevant attorney or law firm has been hired to perform services, or any other appropriate actions. Meaning, Trump is looking at every individual who has ever engaged in these practices currently, right now, as we speak, over the last 4 years of the Biden administration, and even during his first 4 years in his first term in office. He's looking at all of those cases and seeing, was there a politicization of law firms and the justice system? And if there were, if they believe they were, they will place sanctions on them or take other actions. Now, this is pretty big because, judges, they can't technically do things as they please. When we hear about federal judges in different parts of the country, ordering to stop Trump's actions, it's not like the judges are just doing this on their own. The judges are usually making a determination based on a lawsuit. There are law firms that bring the lawsuits in those particular courts. The judge, based on the lawsuit, puts a hold on the order until the case goes through. It's not like the judge is just, springing out of the woodwork and giving orders to the president. They are making judgments on legal cases, and those then are used to put holds on the orders as they move their way up through the legal system. A good amount of these cases are being filed by a handful of political law firms. And these handful of political law firms are very, very much tied into kind of this machine. And again, it's not like even a partisan thing. There are organizations on the left that do it. There are organizations on the right that do it too. Although you can argue that maybe there's a different interpretation of whether they're violating the law on this, because this is novel interpretation. A lot of times this is kind of by the book interpretation. Depends on what you want to say. And look, it's not like this new action from Trump will just end all legal challenges to his orders either. But it will make it harder for Trump to be challenged, right? This could seriously impact political legal firms that use the law in this way. Because again, while it will not stop injunctions or actions against President Donald Trump using the law, if the president oversteps the law, they can file lawsuits. But the argument is they can't just use lawsuits unless a law is broken. So unless Donald Trump does something that actually does go against the Constitution or does go against existing law, you can't just have law firms working politically file things on every single case when there's no historical violation of that particular order. If the order is within the law, you can't use the law to block it. That's kind of the argument here. Now look, speaking of this also, alongside it, Trump has also been actively revoking the security clearances of many of his political rivals and critics. Remember, part of the sanctions is he can revoke the security clearances of law firms, individuals, and so on. He's been doing it already. And this has included actions against major Democrat groups. And now, the latest, he has also pulled the security clearances of former Vice President Kamala Harris, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and a lot of others. This was announced in a White House memorandum for the heads of executive departments and agencies. This is the official White House statement on it. Trump said, quote, "I have determined that it is no longer in the national interest for the following individuals to access classified information. These include Antony Blinken, the former Secretary of State, Jacob Sullivan, Lisa Monaco, Mark Zaid, Norman Isis, Letitia James, the judge again in New York who brought the cases against him, Alvin Bragg also, Andrew Wiseman, Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Cheney, Kamala Harris, Adam Kinzinger, Fiona Hill, Alexander Vindman, Joseph R. Biden Jr., that's Joe Biden, and any other member of Joseph R. Biden Jr.'s family." He said, "Therefore, I hereby direct every executive department and agency head to take all additional actions as necessary and consistent with existing law to revoke any active security clearances held by the aforementioned individuals and to immediately rescind their access to classified information." He said also, "I direct all executive departments and agency heads to revoke unescorted access to United States government facilities from these individuals." Meaning unless they're escorted, they can't just enter these facilities. Now also, the Trump administration has been dealing with leaks, and there are officials and government employees who've been bypassing the normal whistleblower process and are turning to the media. And this has resulted in news stories, citing unnamed sources. According to sources familiar with Trump's thinking, or sources familiar with this issue, or who may have heard this, right? Hearsay, in other words. This is very common in the media right now. Now, the Trump administration has frequently said that many of these stories are false. And they note that these individuals, these articles, they often cite people who say they heard rumors according to someone who heard someone say this, or things along those lines. In other words, it's like hearsay, and it's getting a lot of news coverage. Now, this also ties back to challenges that Trump faced kind of heavily during his first term in office. During his first term in office, constantly there were leaks. They're like, how is Trump's administration so leaky? How are there so many leaks coming out? And there were streams of stories that Trump later showed were false or fake. A lot of them got overturned eventually, but these caused scandals. They would eventually get debunked, but during the meantime, they acted to cause chaos for his administration. Some of them brought lawsuits, some of them resulted in attempts to impeach him. A lot of these turned out to be false. And now it seems the new administration is trying to prevent this. They're taking strong action to go after people who leak information. Fox News said this. It said the Pentagon said it would investigate what it claims are leaks of national security information, saying that the probes, the investigations, could include polygraph tests, lie detector tests, for employees in the Defense Department. And it says this. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's Chief of Staff, Joe Casper, sent a memo Friday saying that the Pentagon's intelligence and law enforcement arms are probing recent unauthorized disclosures of national security information without offering details about alleged leaks. It says that recent authorized disclosures of national security information involving sensitive communications with principals within the Office of the Secretary of Defense demand immediate and thorough investigation, Casper wrote. Now, look, it's not just an issue in the military, the issue of leaks, right? Look, we also saw a major case right, similar to this, involving a former FBI agent just recently. Town Hall said this: a former FBI agent who played a key role in opposing President Donald Trump's first term has now been charged with disclosing confidential information, raising serious concerns about the integrity of law enforcement agencies and their political neutrality. This troubling development, it says, underscores the pattern of misconduct within the FBI under previous administrations, where partisan bias has influenced critical decisions. It says FBI agents arrested Jonathan Booma, a 15-year veteran of the agency, at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City. Booma stands accused of printing approximately 130 classified FBI documents and messages, which he then allegedly shared with associates to aid in the writings of a book about his time at the Bureau. According to the court filing, Booma was an FBI and supervisory special agent specializing in counterintelligence and counter-proliferation issues. A book draft he wrote contains sensitive information he obtained through his position at the agency related to the FBI's investigations into a foreign country's weapons of mass destruction, WMD programs. It says his actions violated 18 U.S. codes, Section 1905, and he also allegedly printed screenshots of communications between him and a confidential human source on an encrypted app. It notes as well, in November 2023, law enforcement searched Booma's home and found that he had FBI information. Now, on that point, it's kind of common for people in different agencies to want to write books about the work they did. It's not like unusual, and oftentimes they do have sometimes printed information in those books. The technicality is, if you want to write a book and you were in one of these government agencies, you have to go through a clearance process, and for a lot of them that's a big headache. It's a very difficult process. You have to get your book cleared for release. They review all of the information. They review all of the documents, and they have to redact it. The old striped pieces of paper. They have to redact it in order to let you publish it. Now, for a lot of people I know, again, I've interviewed a lot of authors who've gone through this process. It's a big headache, and sometimes the entire book, maybe not in its entirety, is blocked, but entire sections might be blocked from release. If you try to bypass that, it's the same as basically trying to leak confidential information, and that's the challenge they face. Now, it's not clear the technicalities of this case. We'll see if the person's innocent or guilty, because remember, innocent until proven guilty. But it does seem to be that this is around that, the very difficult clearance process, and what happens if you try to avoid it, right, allegedly. Now, look, on another topic, in addition to the challenges in the courts and the leaks from inside the government, there's also the issue of mass protests and political violence. The latest social movement involved the protests and vandalism and even the fire bombings targeting Tesla, the company of Elon Musk, one of them, working as a type of retribution against the company's founder, Musk, who has become a key figure in the Trump administration. In other words, it seems this is political protest taking the form of a protest against a business. And now Donald Trump is suggesting there will be serious consequences for anybody involved in these attacks on Tesla, including the people involved in funding and organizing. Because remember, these are not just protests at this point, it's fire bombings, it's physical threats, it's the leaking of personal information, home addresses, phone numbers of every person who bought a Tesla, and the suggestion that this may result in violence and even calls for violence. Now, Donald Trump made these comments during remarks as Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth last week. Watch this.
These people are going to be caught, and they're going to be caught, and they're going to be prosecuted. And from what they tell me, I see this just by watching your programs and reading the news, but from what they tell me, they could get 20 years in jail, and they'll get it. I'll tell you, there's going to be no leniency, and there'll be no pardons. I can tell you that right.
And you said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe you said this morning 20 years in jail, and then maybe they'll go to one of these prisons in El Salvador. Do you think with the way that the judges have been issuing injunctions, it would be easier or harder to send these Tesla domestic terrorists to a jail in El Salvador than these MS-13 or Tren de Aragua guys.
Well, I view these people as terrorists just like others. These are, when I looked at those showrooms burning and those cars, not one or two, like 7, 8, 10 burning, exploding all over the place. These are terrorists. You didn't have that on January 6th, I can tell you. You didn't have anything like that on January 6th, which is sort of amazing because on January 6th, the Democrats were talking. Nobody was killed other than a very beautiful young woman, Ashley Babbitt. Nobody was killed. And you look at what's going on now with these terrorists. These are terrorists, and that's an organized event. You know, take a look at their signs. Take a look. They're all made by the same sign company. A nice, expensive job. Now, these are the people that finance it are, in my opinion, in just as big a trouble as the people that are setting the match and setting the fires. So we'll see. It's under very serious investigation by the FBI and by the Justice Department. These people are terrorists.
Now, the part where he notes the people financing these protests and such are just as guilty, that's pretty serious. Because look, Elon Musk had posted the names of several people allegedly involved in financing these protests. We haven't yet seen him provide the evidence proving these people are behind it. But if it's true, this is some major Democrat figures. It would be some of the biggest figures on their side. And he also alleged that there were around 5 known organizations that have been involved in starting and running the attacks. Now, again, he has not yet shown the evidence of this, but if his claims do prove to be true and Trump is, accurate that these individuals and these groups are going to face legal charges, this would effectively mean some of the biggest financiers on the Democrat side and also some of the biggest organizations on the grassroots level, they could face criminal charges if they go through with this. And again, they haven't yet shown the evidence proving it, but this is where the argument is at. Now, the allegation is these are planned, organized, and funded operations, and they've resulted in what the administration is now calling acts of terrorism. Elon Musk wrote this in response to it. He said the worst bad guys are the ones who are financing the Tesla terror campaign. Now, as Trump noted also, the FBI and the Department of Justice, they're now investigating the attacks. They're currently looking into it. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced the arrest of 3 individuals already. That was last week. And they're now facing criminal charges for firebombing Teslas and Tesla dealerships. Now, we have not yet seen any actions against the figures or groups allegedly behind the attacks, but they are saying that's coming. We'll see if it happens, but they're saying it is coming. Now, look, in other news, the culture war in this country is still very much taking place. And this involves the backlash against identity politics. A lot of it's been on that front. When Joe Biden was president, we saw conservatives boycotting Bud Light, right? We saw boycotts of other products as well. A lot of that was happening. And to be clear, that was boycotts, right? Not fire bombings, which is what we're now watching. But the boycotts then led to companies to begin distancing themselves from issues that align with the whole, DEI campaign, identity politics. And now we're still watching this happen. It looks like the latest face of this whole boycott movement is the Snow White remake. Daily Mail said this. It said Disney's live-action woke remake of Snow White is shaping up to be one of the franchise's worst-performing movies in recent years, according to initial box office figures. And it says the first results from the theaters have been revealed, and they're not great. The movie made just $3.5 million in Thursday previews and is projected to earn a disappointing $45 to $55 million during its opening weekend. That is very bad for a film like this, which cost about $250 million, not to mention the other costs. Now, notes this. It says that places the film below Disney's Little Mermaid remake, which premiered in 2023 and made $95 million during opening. And it also underperformed just about all the other ones as well. Look, in my opinion, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The original cartoons were great. I'd still show them to my kids, right? I think kids still can appreciate the cartoon ones. They're again remaking these as live action, which everything else aside is questionable. They don't seem to be doing that well. But with this film in particular, the writing has been on the wall kind of from the beginning. Now, it started with the big reveal of the 7 dwarves for this Snow White remake, which was framed not as dwarves. And so you call it, Snow White and the 7 dwarves, and there's one dwarf, right? They instead framed it as magical creatures of all sizes and genders. And that's a bit different, right? And it turned out they almost had actual dwarves, they almost did, but they decided not to because they were facing criticism against objectifying dwarves, right? Little people. A lot of the criticism came from Peter Dinklage. He's the dwarf from Game of Thrones. He suggested Disney was engaging in stereotypes by having actual dwarves. And some criticized that as saying, well, he gets a lot of roles portraying dwarves in Hollywood, and by saying this is objectifying them, it kind of prevents other little people from getting roles in Hollywood as well. Right? The argument was there can be only one dwarf in Hollywood. Now, there were also controversies of Rachel Zegler. She was the one who played Snow White. And she expressed some of her political opinions ahead of the 2024 elections. Disney went into damage control because it kind of caused a political divide. That didn't really work out because it got a lot of conservatives kind of angry. And then on the other side, there was Gal Gadot, who played the evil queen. And, she's Israeli. She came out in support of Israel. And that likewise got many on the other side of the political aisle angry in light of the Israel-Hamas war. So they kind of got both sides of the political spectrum angry at the film, by extension of the people playing in it. And that kind of drew a whole contrast between her and Zegler as well. It kind of pitted them against each other, even though they seemed to be, trying to get along on camera. Then there were also other issues, like there being no prince in the movie anymore. And then the movie being framed as a type of, feminist anthem, right? Sticking it to the man. We don't need no prince to save us. And then there were other scandals that followed as well. In other words, they basically made it political. What was supposed to be an innocent movie for kids was transformed into, at least based on perception, a movie about politics. And frankly, if people want to go see a movie about politics, you might watch a podcast. You might watch a news show. You don't necessarily want to watch a kids movie where they're going to try to preach to you about politics through other means. And whether the movie did that or not, you decide. But that's the way people have now interpreted it because of all these political issues it's been dragged into. The box office results we're now seeing, well, it's just a continuation of the ongoing saga of what we've seen with other Hollywood films. Hollywood seems to be trying to distance itself from identity politics, getting back to entertainment, and that's hard because just about every actor out there has a very strong political opinion, like most people, and they tend to, let's say, air their public opinions on politics and so on, which then gets people mad at the entire entertainment industry. Now, as we watch this happen, there's a public rejection now taking place of these types of things. A lot of people, if you want to watch a movie, you don't want to watch something political unless you knowingly go and see something political, like a documentary or something like that. The difference between a lot of Hollywood films and maybe a documentary or a news show is escapism. You're trying to watch a story, you're trying to get away from things, you're trying to turn a blind eye to the world for a little bit and just enjoy something else. And if they insert politics into that space, then why are you going to go watch it? That's the argument from a lot of people. Now, unfortunately for Disney, their Snow White remake got pulled into politics. And it seems because of that, a lot of people, they're just not watching it. And meanwhile, onto some other news, among the many debates now happening in the country is also whether green card holders or migrants, actual ones, can have their visas or other documents revoked if they begin acting against the United States. Well, that debate is gaining more traction right now. I'll be talking more about this after I come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. Big question here. Can green card holders or even American citizens be stripped of their legal documents? Can an American citizen be stripped of citizenship? Well, this is part of the debate now happening. Among the many debates in the country is whether green card holders or actual migrants can have their visas or the documents revoked if they begin acting against the United States. And this has been partly triggered by actions of the Trump administration to deport key figures involved in the pro-Gaza protests at American universities, including at Columbia University. One of the key figures was exposed openly calling for the destruction of Western civilization. Can you deport somebody and remove their documentation if they call for that? And others have now been deported for being accused of making similar statements to that. But the counter-argument is whether people who have not been charged with crimes, because many of them have not, can you deport somebody for making statements against the United States or for organizing protests like the ones we've been seeing? Because you could argue that falls under constitutional rights, the ability to mobilize and hold protests, and the ability to say whatever you want. Well, what are the limits to that, right? And can you just kick someone out of the country if they violate that? Well, there are now arguments on the legalities of even potentially revoking the citizenship of people who are, new immigrants, even when they've otherwise gone through legal channels into the country, meaning they're not illegal immigrants. Red State said this in an opinion. It said the Trump administration is planning to start stripping citizenship from naturalized citizens who are determined to be offering material support to Hamas and other such groups, meaning if you support terrorists. Administration advisors and head of the Article 3 project, Mike Davis, said, quote, "What's going to be on the horizon are denaturalization cases." He said you're going to have Hamas supporters who have been naturalized within the last 10 years, and they are eligible to lose their status as citizens and get deported. In other words, they're suggesting there is some legal ground to remove the citizenship of naturalized U.S. citizens, meaning you're a new citizen. You came to the U.S., you got your citizenship, and if you do things against the country within 10 years, you can lose it. They note that many people think citizenship is a done deal once it's granted. It isn't, they say. Citizenship may be revoked for several reasons, and these include, quote, for having illegally procured citizenship or by concealment of a material fact or by willful misrepresentation. If you falsify your justification or reasons for getting citizenship, you could lose your citizenship. It could also be for a conviction or procedure or attempting to procure the naturalization of anyone contrary to the law. Also, it says, for being discharged under other than honorable conditions if they acquired naturalization through wartime military service. You can actually become a U.S. citizen by serving in the military, right? There's some differences with that law as well. Or it says by refusing to testify before a congressional committee on alleged subversive activities. If you're trying to subvert the country and you don't want to testify on it, oftentimes you find that with communist groups. And it says any lie or misrepresentation on a citizenship application opens the door to having citizenship revoked. And it says as well, the ability to denaturalize someone for illegally procuring citizenship extends back quite a distance. In 2004, Jacques Pellige was denaturalized for having been a Nazi concentration camp guard during World War II and not disclosing it when he became a citizen in 1957. And in addition to the above causes, 8 U.S.C. 1451 allows for denaturalization for membership in organizations that show, quote, such person was not attached to the principles of the Constitution of the United States and was not well disposed to the good order and happiness of the United States at the time of naturalization. And you can interpret that pretty broadly, right? Well, are the enemies of the United States, are they saying they want to destroy Western civilization? Are they making actions and statements that basically say that they hate this country? Well, that could get a bit funny, right? Now it notes this proviso stopped communists during the Cold War. And it says, and should stop them and Islamists today. Interestingly, another piece on this is if you try to come to the United States and become a citizen, one of the questions they ask you is still, to this day, are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? And if you lie about having been a member of the Communist Party, which for a lot of like Chinese citizens, for example, most of them have been members of the Communist Party or its affiliated organizations, Communist Youth League, Young Pioneers. A lot of them have to lie to get citizenship. And so that could be a big issue as well, especially when you're dealing with the subversive organizations and front groups, which tend to involve a lot of people like that. Folks, that said, hit the like button, leave a comment. Let's jump into some questions. Let's see here. First off, TZ Burton, you're saying, Josh, can Trump really stop the spending with the Doge cut recommendations, or will he just be forced by the courts to spend money in other areas? So you're saying, can Trump really stop spending based on Doge recommendations? So that's another legal argument taking place. And that's working alongside the Doge cases. So the Department of Government Efficiency, they're trying to reduce the fat. They're trying to reduce the extra spending. And, they're identifying, again, it's a lot of claims, 4.5 trillion here, 3 trillion here, whatever else, billions here, millions here. They're claiming to identify a lot of money that has been misspent. Now, the complication here is that legally, when Congress authorizes a budget, the government actually has to spend that money. And Trump has been trying to change that. He's been trying to, it's another legal case moving alongside basically everything else. It's the question of whether the government cannot spend money that has been delegated. And if they don't have to spend it, well, the question is, what do you do with it? Trump has suggested the money will go into the U.S. Treasury, meaning if they manage to cut spending. For example, if the government has a project, right, maybe it's a military project, the Department of Defense has been authorized to spend money on the research and development of a particular thing. The money's been approved by Congress, documented, Congress authorized it, sent there. They have to spend every dollar. Now, the problem you have with that is sometimes the project is able to not spend all of that money. And so what do you do when you're legally, legally you have to, you have no choice. You have to spend every dollar of it. Well, you might overspend, obviously, right? You might overspend. You might say, hey, I need to spend the rest of this money. Let's, have a big party. Let's buy gifts. Let's do something because we got to spend it. Legally, you have to. Call it whatever you want. This is the way the law works right now. They don't really have a choice. Now, there are individuals trying to block Trump from changing that law, saying that Trump as president can't just repeal that. Trump has argued that, based on executive privilege, the authorities of the president, he should be able to basically redirect funding if it's not being spent on something. It's another legal avenue happening right now. But the short answer on that is currently, yes, they have to spend all the money. It is being challenged, but they currently have to spend all the money. And so the money you're seeing getting saved, legally they have to direct it to other things. And that might result in them maybe working on new projects or finding other uses for government money, which is one of the big complications you have with, USAID, for example, where they've gone through the books and said, why are we spending money on all these programs? They're trying to cut the money to those programs. They've now moved USAID under the State Department. The technicality with that is they still have to spend the money unless Trump can change the law, meaning they're going to have to find new programs to give the money to. And this is a big, complicated issue because it's a lot of money. You know, there were movies in the past. There was a movie in like the 80s or 90s about this guy. I mean, keep in mind, this was a time when money went a lot further. I believe the movie was the guy had to spend $1 million in a week, and it was like he couldn't invest the money, and there was some parameters to it. There were certain things you can't buy, and so it was this guy basically trying to spend all this money, and if he spent all the money, he would get some additional money. It was an interesting movie before my time, but I did see it. That's kind of where the government is right now. Like, imagine you have hundreds of billions of dollars and you got to find something to spend it on, or you have to change the law so that you can take that money and, like, you know, give it to the U.S. Treasury. That's kind of where they're at right now. So they got to do something with it in the meantime, unless they can change the law. Ashley from California, you're saying, instead of going after the attorneys that bring about frivolous lawsuits, shouldn't Trump work with Speaker Johnson to get his executive order EOs passed as laws that can't be overturned by various judges? Yeah, there's a lot going on here. Okay, so when it comes to the executive orders, right? When it comes to the executive orders, there are different arguments with it. When Obama was president, he was making a lot of executive orders, especially during his second term in office. And, you know, at that time, it was conservatives. It was a lot of Republicans who were trying to stop him from doing it. It was a lot of Republicans saying that the president can't just rule by a decree. You can't use executive orders like that. The argument was executive orders should have some limits to them. The president can't just because the issue with executive orders and presidential actions, you can bypass Congress. You can bypass the legislative process. In America, under the Constitution, we have a very set way of again, enacting things, of taking action. It has to go through Congress and then signed by the president, and then even then can be challenged through lawsuits, which then have to go to the Supreme Court to determine whether the law, right, whether this bill that turned into legislation is within the parameters of the Constitution. There's a lot of checks and balances with it, and that's the system. Now, that is the way it's set up in the Constitution. The argument then is, well, the president can bypass this entire thing by just signing a document, an executive order. And the executive order, you know, technically it's easily overturned once the president's term in office is up. If the next president says, hey, I don't want this, they can sign a paper and it's gone. Trump did that day one. He got rid of, over 70 executive orders from the Biden administration. Biden did the same thing to Trump. When Biden was president, he signed an executive order and got rid of a lot of Donald Trump's executive orders. Boom, done, it's gone. Now, the place we're in right now is whether you believe a president should kind of use executive orders in this way. The reality is, because it's been done this way, and because, you know, Obama did it, Biden did it, Trump did it, it's not even just them. You go back to like Reagan, you know, he did it too. This has become accepted, whether people agree with it or not. It has become an accepted power of the president and a way of getting around these processes. The issue you have is if a president does something that, you know, people believe may violate the Constitution. If the president does something using executive orders that people may say violates state rights, you know, if I mean, look, when Biden was president, a lot of conservatives had issues with his executive orders. When Obama was president, a lot of Republicans had issues with his executive orders. And you had states, Florida, Texas, other conservative states, trying to block his orders. The question, and now you see it on the other side. Trump is president, and you have a lot of Democrats trying to block his orders. It's the same thing, just the tables are turned. The big question is, do you believe that, if it's argued that what the president is doing is, in violation of state rights or the Constitution or local law, should a state or an organization, and there are Democrat legal firms and there are Republican legal firms, should they be able to put an injunction on the order saying this cannot be enforced in the state of Texas, this cannot be enforced in the state of California, this cannot be enforced in the state of Florida or New York? And the reality is, when a Republican does it, Democrats tend to not like it. When a Democrat does it, Republicans tend to not like it. When you see things like this, you got to kind of think, I mean, look, you might agree with what Trump is doing. If the tables were turned and Kamala Harris was president, would you feel the same way? And if she was making executive orders every single day, would you want Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, to put actions to try to stop it? Would you want, America First Legal or a Republican legal organization to be able to file a lawsuit and have a, more conservative aligned judge block that executive order until it is heard by the Supreme Court, so it's not being enforced until it goes to the Supreme Court, or, realistically back and forth as it moves up the process? Would you want that? And the question is, if you don't want it, well, where are we putting the country? This is kind of the challenge with this. Just generally speaking, people tend to like actions like this when it's in their interest. They tend to not like it when it's against their interest. And again, that's where things are at, right? I think the argument right now, when I showed you some of the Trump's order from just the other day, where Trump made this executive order basically going to sanction law firms, what he is doing is going for the gray area. This is just my interpretation. He's going for the gray area. He's not saying he's going to eliminate those processes altogether, but he is saying that if a presidential action does not violate an existing law based on existing interpretation, you can't just block it. Unless a law has actually been violated, you can't block it. And and what we've seen a lot of times is there are novel interpretations and an overstepping of the law that is used to block it. That does not apply to every case, but it does apply to some. And so even with this order, you still will see some, orders get blocked, but it won't be as many probably is what'll happen. The other question here, though, is that, should Trump, instead of doing this, work with House Speaker Mike Johnson to get his executive orders passed? So if Trump is going to solidify his actions, if he wants to make sure that his executive orders are not a flash in the pan, 4 years, 8 years, we'll see. If a conservative comes in next time and maintains all of Trump's policies, maybe we could have this for, 8, 12, 16 years. Who knows? But if a new president comes in and they don't like the executive orders, they can do what Trump did to Biden. Day one, sign a document, all the executive orders are gone, and none of it had any lasting weight in changing the country. If you want to bypass, if you want to avoid that, you have to get it into law. You have to go through the legislative process, the old constitutional path. Now, the problem with that is that if you want to go through the legislative process, you got to get some people on the other side working with you. Unless you overturn the filibuster, which is very controversial in the United States because that's kind of what's set in place to make sure that one party doesn't just steamroll the other one when they have the opportunity to. They do it sometimes, but it's used very selectively. It would mean that Trump would have to basically get some Democrats voting with him in order to get his orders passed. And that would mean that he would have to do things in a way that some people on the Democrat side would agree with. It would have to be bipartisan. Now, could Trump do that with all of his orders? Probably not. Could he do it with some of his orders? Probably. And that would be the challenge. It's also a very long process. Now from Trump's side, what I think he's doing, just personal interpretation, he's trying to fast track things. Because if he was not doing things this way, look, in Trump's interpretation, what does he see? He had his entire first term in office. A president, normally you get 2 terms. Trump believes his second term was stolen from him. Believe it, agree with it, or disagree with it, you choose. Trump has continued saying it, right? Trump has continued saying that the second term was stolen by him. And he also argues that his first term was kind of sabotaged by legal attacks, by leakers, by people backstabbing him, by all that stuff. Now, do you believe that was justified or not? That's your choice, but this is what Trump believes. And so in his eyes, his entire first term in office was undermined. His entire first term in office was tainted by the Trump-Russia scandal, which turned out to be fake. It was fake. Again, when they even had a special counsel investigate it, they proved it was fake. That was fake. But it served to undermine him. It served to prevent him from doing a lot of things. He was busy fighting legal battles, getting impeached, dealing with leakers and hit pieces and fake stories and the whole 9 yards. His first term in office, he was crippled, but he still did a lot. Then what happened? He lost the election, believe what you will in terms of whether that was legit or not, but Biden became president. Biden overturned everything Trump did, even while Trump was inhibited. Trump coming in now, it's basically where you would be if you had never been president. He's basically coming in as a second, first term in office. A president normally, the first 4 years kind of sets the foundation. The second 4 years embeds their policies in the culture. If you can make a president a one-term president, they will not change the culture of the country. They will have no lasting impact. If Trump is going to have a lasting impact, he needs to basically piggyback on everything he did in his first term. The challenge he faces is everything he did in the first term was overturned. And so if he wants to have an effect, he has to bring back everything he did in the first term and get rid of everything Biden did, right? Technically. Like it or not, agree or disagree, he has to reenact everything he did and get rid of everything Biden did. And his executive orders are doing exactly that. What he's doing technically is picking up where he left off and effectively kind of trying at least to delegitimize everything over the last 4 years and investigate it. And so he has fast-tracked, jump-started his administration, basically creating a circumstance through executive order and executive action that would have kind of recreated a first term that he's coming into. And so, look, it feels like this has been breakneck speed. He's only been in office a bit over a month. And he's done a lot. He's only been in office a little over a month. Coming in, doing it like this, he's jump-starting it, starting there, and then moving forward. And only by doing so does he have a chance to have a long-term effect on the country, to fundamentally change the culture of the country, which a president would typically do during their first, during their 8 years in office. Obama changed the country. George Bush changed the country. The question is now, will Trump change the country? Now and, who knows how long. So I do think that he is going to try to go through the legislative process. I do think he's going to try to work with Johnson. And again, he'll have to work with the Democrats. But his orders right now are jump-starting his term as far as I see it. James Dyson, talking about Walt Disney. You said, Josh, Walt is spinning in his grave, Walt Disney. You know, a lot of people say that. If you go back and watch the movies that were made by Walt Disney, they were a lot more innocent, right? I mean, look, you know, the funny thing with having kids is you kind of have an excuse to watch movies and go places you probably would not go as an adult, right? You get to go to Disneyland and the puppet shows in Central Park if you're in New York, or you get to go do kid stuff. And a lot of adults I found it, kid movies are great. You know what I mean? Like, they're great. You know, one of the funnest parts of having a daughter, you know, my daughter's 15 now, you know, she's big. But one of the funnest parts of having a kid is you get to go and watch cartoons again. You get and you have a reason to do it. You get to watch all the kid movies. You get to go to Disneyland, and you get to re-enjoy it. You kind of enjoy it through them. It's fantastic. Having a kid lets you re-enjoy childhood. It's fantastic. Having kids is wonderful. And when you go back and watch a lot of these kids' movies, I mean, maybe as an adult, because you probably haven't watched them in a while, they're good. Like, they're good movies, honestly. Like, they're entertaining. They have the older ones. They have a clear good guy and a clear bad guy. You know, they're compelling. They're well made. The music is often very good. They're great. And I mean, honestly, a lot of the movies in those early years were works of art. They're fantastic. You know, I had the pleasure of interviewing. His name slips my mind. I interviewed one of the early Disney animators. I mean, it wasn't on video. It was a print article. You know, it's from a long time ago. I used to be a print journalist, right? The guy was a former Disney animator. He was also one of the guys who made the movie Secret of NIMH. Great movie if you've never seen it. And he was explaining to me the animation process. And he said that the way that they used to keep pace, because they have to make sure the sound, right, the audio and the music aligns with the animation, he said that they would actually use the beat, the rhythm of the music to animate. They would use it to keep pace, which is why in a lot of older cartoons and older movies, you kind of see the characters bounce with the beat. The guy also made An American Tale, the story about the mouse who finds his parents. Another masterpiece, right? You can watch these old movies and the characters, they'll move with the beat. They move to the rhythm of the music. The older cartoons, they overshow it, where everyone's doing this. The more balanced ones, they don't do it as much. But you'll find that there's kind of a rhythm to the entire movie. And everything, music, audio, singing, the animation in its entirety, it all kind of melds together into the art that animation was. I don't think you can replicate that. I don't think you can have that same thing in a live action film. A live action film has other forms of art involved. But the movies of Walt Disney, they were works of art. I mean, seriously. And, you know, the argument now is that Walt Disney has changed. It's become a very big corporation. You know, they got to make money. They have shareholders. And, you know, the reality is, like it or not, you know, kids have also become less innocent. The audience has changed. You're dealing with kids now who, you know, when I was a kid, we didn't have a dedicated cartoon channel until Cartoon Network came about. If you wanted to watch cartoons, it was Saturday morning. Saturday morning cartoons. Anyone remember that? You didn't have constant entertainment. You know, there were only like 17 channels on the TV. It wasn't that entertaining, unless you were a kid and you wanted to watch like black and white reruns of Gilligan's Island or something, which as a kid I wasn't into. And then, we didn't have cell phones. We did not have constant entertainment. Kids these days, they're exposed to a lot more. Unfortunately, because of social media and everything else, they're just a bit less innocent. And so a lot of movies have had to cater to that audience. It is audiences that are just a bit less innocent. And, the challenge you've had is, should movies go that route? Should they still try to appeal to the innocence of a child? I would say yes, and here's why. So I started saying, as an adult, you have a kid, you get to go to Disneyland again, you get to go and watch cartoons again, you get to re-enjoy innocent entertainment. And as an adult, you can appreciate it again. As an adult, you can enjoy it again. And even as an adult, I would say, how do you differentiate between an adult and a kid? Well, other than being able to take care of yourself and being responsible to yourself and learning to be responsible for other lives, kids or family members or friends, as an adult, you're also just a bit less innocent, right? You've lost some of your innocence. But if an adult can still enjoy those things, I would argue a kid can too. Even if they argue that culture has gone the other way. And so I'm very much in favor of making entertainment that appeals to the innocence of children. And I think that if you do that, you're going to find it's still very much relevant. And I would say, look at some of the movies that have been successful. They do appeal to that, right? You want to watch some fun stuff? My daughter likes the Tuttle Twins. If you want to watch like an anti-communist cartoon show that's actually entertaining, watch the Tuttle Twins. It's actually pretty fun. It's a good cartoon, right? There's a lot of good stuff like that. All right, another question here. Kathleen White, you're saying, I once read a quote, I don't remember by whom, politics amputates the hand of creativity. That's interesting. You could say on both sides, a lot of, there have been some great works of art that do deal with political stories. But that's more when you get into, maybe not, maybe to an extent. If we look at some of the classics, right, you could argue that they take place during times of political turmoil. Shakespeare, for example, does deal with the politics of Caesar and deals with the politics of, falling kingdoms and so on. But the focus of art tends to be more on the human side. What makes art art is the human experience of dealing with conditions outside of their control, right? And showing how they face that trial. I believe that movies do deal more with the human story of how to face adversity, of how to face trials that might get thrown at us. And the relatability of the characters, right? Oftentimes, if you make a character unrelatable, people will not be able to connect with the moral challenges the characters face. And I think that's where politics does get dangerous. If you make a character and they are nothing like a normal person, if you make a character who's infallible, in other words, then people will not be able to connect with them. If you make a character and that character is a victim of the exact things that most people feel that they're being challenged with, and the character does not face those challenges and just folds in the same way you do, you'll feel just as bothered by it as that character does. For example, what are the trials people are currently facing? And this is me getting into entertainment, right? What are the trials a lot of you feel you're currently facing? Well, I would argue a lot of us feel that we're dealing with, race politics and gender politics and global turmoil international conflicts, and you name it. We're dealing with people trying to convince us of altered history. We're dealing with people trying to convince us of, social narratives and class struggle and, identity struggle. And for a lot of people, that's what we're dealing with. Now, what happens when you make a movie that contains all of that, but you don't have the characters address those trials? Well, people feel the movie is just a continuation of the attacks they're under. Now, I think if you made a movie where you can even put in those politics, but you make characters who face them. You make characters who deal with people trying to convince them they're evil because of the color of their skin, right? Race politics or gender politics, whatever else. And you make maybe a character who's relatable, who is like most of America or most people out there, and they got to deal with it. And they face it and overcome it. I think you will have a great movie. The other challenge, though, is that it's going to be partisan. The argument is you can have a movie resonate with certain audiences. You can have a movie resonate with people who think that's good. You can have a movie resonate with people who think that's evil. But if you bring that in, you're not going to hit both. You bring that into your film, you're going to alienate one side or the other. And it's a fine line to walk because you might still alienate people if you even try to do it. The challenge a lot of these big movies face, they make their budgets so high that what would be considered, 30, 40 years ago a success is now regarded as a failure. If you're going to spend $100 million on a film, you got to make at least $100 million, probably more than that, to have a success. You probably don't just want to break even. If you're going to spend $250 million on a film, which some of these ones cost, you got to make a film that resonates with a lot of people. And so if you use divisive topics, your film is not going to achieve that. Plain and simple. This Disney movie making what is it? They're saying it can make up to $45 million. That would have been considered a box office success, 20 years ago. That now it's a failure, but it's because the budgets are so high. And because the budgets are so high, they keep trying to go that route. And I don't think it's a working solution. Unless you can make a movie that does not delve into politics at all, you're not going to make something that resonates with the number of people you need to make a profit. Yeah, I see realitysreal.com has said, make G movies great again. What's really funny? If you look at actual box office successes, G-rated movies, meaning they appeal to everyone, G-rated movies are the most profitable. But at Hollywood, they just don't do them that often. G-rated movies are the most profitable. The other argument is they're also among the harder to make, right? You could argue, which is why a lot of people which is why you see so many horror movies. They're the easiest to make. They're easy to make. And they do get an audience. But if you talk, and you can do them kind of low budget. So they're kind of the easy money movies. But G-rated movies are actually the most profitable, and they reach the broadest audience. And then you got to understand too, a lot of Hollywood films, they don't just have to get the American audience. They want to get a global audience. And when you get outside certain countries, you're dealing with hyper-conservative audiences in some countries. And if you have a drop of some of these things that are considered contentious or illegal there, they'll just ban your movie altogether. Look at the Arab countries, for example. And so I really do think these companies are shooting themselves in the foot by delving into politics. And then there's the wild card of even if your movie is free of that, if you have a lead actor and that actor insists on venting their political views online, even if your movie did not get into any of that, that actor will drag your movie into it, which has happened to some films, and I feel kind of bad for him on that. They need to make like I don't know, some kind of like contractual agreement. Don't talk about politics for 2 years until the film is done. You know what I mean? Because that happens to him too. It's just a rough time for the world, I think. Another question, you're Kathleen White. You're saying, I once read a quote. I don't remember by whom. Oh, sorry, I read that already. All right, folks, it's getting a bit late. We're going to end it here, but join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Happy Monday to all of you. Thank you for being here. That said, please share this episode. Help us get the word out. It helps us quite a bit. Give us a like, especially on YouTube. It helps us on the algorithm. That said, folks, appreciate all of you. Join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. I'll see you then. And as always, please take care of yourselves. Stay informed. Stay free. Thank you.